Thieves target Karoline Leavitt's mansion and instantly regret it. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The moon shone high in the sky, casting a cool silver light over the vast estate of the Leavitt's mansion, nestled on the outskirts of Long Island. It was a fortress of opulence and exclusivity, with its high windows and well-manicured gardens barely hinting at the wealth it housed. Behind the high wrought iron gates, the manor glittered like a jewel in the night, sheltered from the hustle and bustle of the distant city. For most, it represented unattainable wealth, a dream out of reach. But for the four criminals gathered at the edge of the property, it was an ideal target. Vince, the team leader, stood at the front of the group, his eyes fixed on the silhouette of the mansion from a distance. He was a seasoned criminal, having spent years in the shadows orchestrating burglaries and robberies requiring meticulous planning. His reputation preceded him, and his loyal and reliable team was as ruthless and cunning as he was. But tonight, as he adjusted the collar of his jacket, Vince knew they were on the verge of something big. This would be their last heist, the one that would put them out of business forever. "Tonight's the night," Vince murmured, his eyes crinkling as he surveyed the mansion. He'd been studying the property for weeks. Every movement of the occupants, every detail of the security system, every fire escape, everything had been meticulously mapped. He was confident. Victor Leavitt, the mansion's owner, was a notoriously reclusive businessman who had just left on a business trip abroad. The timing was perfect. The mansion, with its priceless art collections, ancient wines, and gilded furniture, was ripe for the plundering. Behind Vince, Jenna, Al, and Gary were getting ready. Jenna, the agile and perceptive thief, was adjusting the gloves on her hands while checking her tool bag. Quick and intelligent, she spotted the smallest details that others might have missed. She was able to enter a house without leaving a trace, and her skills were invaluable on high-risk missions like this. Al, the team's technical specialist, was cracking his knuckles, already concentrating on the best way to disable the security system. Despite his young age, he possessed an instinctive understanding of electronics that made him a valuable asset. His expertise had saved them on more than one occasion. And tonight his task was to disable the state-of-the-art security systems installed by Victor Leavitt. Al had visited the property a few months earlier on another job, and on that occasion had gathered crucial information about the security features, the layout of the cameras, the alarm systems, the pressure-sensitive floors. All these details would be key to the success of their heist. Gary, the brute force of the group, remained silent in the back. He wasn't as cerebral as the others, but his physical presence was undeniable. Imposing with his broad shoulders and powerful fists, he had a place in Vince's team to handle anything that might impede their progress. Tonight, his role would be to carry the heavy loot and make sure the team wasn't disturbed by the unexpected. "We go in fast, discreetly, and come out clean," Vince said, his voice low and authoritative. "No unnecessary risks. We've done our homework. The alarms will be disabled in minutes, and we'll be out before anyone notices we're there." Al pulled a small device from his bag and began tapping frantically on it. "Just give me a second to bypass the security system on the gates," he murmured. He was already in his bubble, his fingers sliding rapidly over the device's keys as he bypassed the outer security measures. It was a risky gamble, but they had no choice. The perimeter of the mansion was closely monitored by cameras and sensors that would set off alarms as soon as they approached. Gary, ready, gripped his crowbar tightly. "Tell me where to go, Vince," he said with a smile. His husky voice and attitude suggested that he was more than ready to tackle the task ahead. Meanwhile, Jenna's gaze remained fixed on the mansion's windows. "I'll take the back, you take the front entrance," she said calmly. "I'll clear any obstructions before you move." Vince nodded, impressed by Jenna's confidence. He trusted her completely with the back door. Her quick wit had saved them in tense situations before. "All set, let's go." The group moved as one, gliding silently through the shadows toward the mansion. Vince, Jenna, Al, and Gary advanced toward the rear of the estate, where the high walls were less guarded. As they approached the rear entrance, Vince mentally went over the plan one last time, checking for any unforeseen circumstances. A perfect burglary was only as good as its execution, and Vince knew that every second counted. Unbeknownst to them, however, Karoline Leavitt, Victor's wife, was at the heart of the mansion. Unlike her husband, who preferred to stay out of the spotlight, Karoline was far more perceptive. She was perfectly aware of her surroundings and intimately familiar with the technology that secured the mansion. It was she herself who had designed and maintained these security systems, knowing that their home would always be a target for thieves like these. As the group moved towards the back door, Karoline watched them with calm precision from her high-tech control room at the heart of the mansion. Not only was she aware of their approach, but she'd been tracking their every move for several minutes. From her vantage point, she could see their every step, their every glance, but Karoline wasn't worried. On the contrary, she was almost amused. These thieves, so confident in their plan, had no idea what lay ahead. "Let's have some fun," she murmured, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. She leaned forward, her fingers dancing over the control panel, ready to activate the systems the criminals thought they'd disabled. Tonight, the hunters would become the prey, and Karoline Leavitt was about to reverse the situation in the most entertaining way possible. The silence of night enveloped the mansion as the four criminals passed through the back gate, gliding like shadows between the high hedges and ivy-covered stone walls. The moonlight barely touched the ground as they made their way towards the rear entrance. The faint sound of their footsteps on the broken gravel, their only sound. It was a quiet night, almost too quiet, but neither of them stopped to question the eerie calm. They had rehearsed this moment too many times to fail now. The plan had been perfect from the start, and everything had gone according to plan. Vince, who led the group with quiet authority, was the first to reach the back door. He signaled to Al, who immediately took out a small device and began manipulating the door's security panel. This was equipped with a biometric locking system, a high-tech measure designed to deter anyone without the proper credentials. But for Al, accustomed to hacking countless systems, this was just one more hurdle to overcome. Crouching in front of the panel, his fingers flew over the buttons with experienced precision. "Got this?" murmured Vince in a low voice, glancing over his shoulder. Yes, no problem," replied Al without looking up. His gaze remained fixed on the panel, his face illuminated by the pale glow of his device's screen. His mind calculated every movement, as if he were solving a complex puzzle, his confidence growing with every second. Gary, stationed nearby, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his tall frame dominating the others. He adjusted the strap of his bag, which rattled with stolen tools and objects, ready to be filled with the manor's treasures. He wasn't worried. He never was. His role was simple: protect the team and carry the heavy stuff when the time came. "You're taking too long, Al. You're taking too long, Al. I don't want to get stuck in this fancy house," Gary growled. Al glowered at him, but remained silent. Gary had always been impatient, a quality that could be both an asset and a weakness in situations like this. Al's fingers continued to tap on the device as he hummed a tune of concentration. After a few more moments, a slight click indicated that the locking system had deactivated. "That's it," said Al, straightening up with a satisfied smile. Vince nodded and motioned for the group to go inside. "We're off." The moment they crossed the threshold of the mansion, a sudden gust of cold air enveloped them. An immense corridor stretched out before them, lined with dark woodwork and elegant, expensive pieces of art hanging on the walls. The grandeur of the place was undeniable, but it didn't faze the criminals. They were professionals, hardened by years of experience. The mansion's wealth was just a target, another score to be achieved. No room for wonder. Jenna, the most agile of the group, took the lead. She moved silently, her footsteps barely audible as she glided along the corridor, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. She was the best at analyzing her surroundings and knew how to spot anything amiss. "Quiet," Jenna whispered over her shoulder in a calm, low voice. "There are motion detectors here. Avoid the beams and you'll be fine." Vince nodded briefly. He had total confidence in Jenna. She'd been part of the team for years, and her quick wit had gotten them out of difficult situations more times than he could remember. She understood the importance of discretion in this kind of operation and was already calculating her path through the darkened mansion, avoiding every visible sensor and camera. Behind Jenna, Al and Gary followed, eager to start filling their bags. Al's device beeped faintly as he reconnected to the mansion's security systems. "Okay," he said in a whisper, his eyes fixed on the screen. The main alarms are off, but there are still some secondary systems we need to bypass before we're safe. Gary swayed from one foot to the other. I don't care about the alarms, man. I'm just here to get the goods, he muttered. Vince raised his hand. Focus, Gary. We've got to stay alert. No mistakes. He turned to Al. What next? Al didn't answer immediately, absorbed in his work. His fingers tapped rapidly on the device, navigating the labyrinth of the mansion's security systems. The Leavittses had spared no expense on their home, with every inch covered in surveillance. But Al knew the system well. He'd been inside this mansion before, and that knowledge would now pay off. Give me a minute to lock down the cameras and disable the silent alarms, said Al, concentrating. Once that's done, we'll be in the clear. Vince nodded, but his gaze fell on the majestic staircase leading up to the second floor. It was said that Victor Leavitt kept his most prized possessions up there: rare jewelry, vintage watches, and priceless works of art. If they could reach the second floor, they could fill their pockets in just a few hours. Jenna, who was already ahead checking out the next room, returned and whispered barely audibly, "That's it for now. All clear in the main lounge. Are you ready to move on?" A satisfied smile played on Vince's lips. "We're ready to go." They made rapid progress, their movements fluid and well-honed. Every moment brought them closer to their goal. Jenna guided them through a maze of corridors and staircases, deftly avoiding security beams and cameras. She was already familiar with the layout of the mansion, knowing exactly where to set foot and where to move. Ahead of them, the grand salon opened up, with its high ceilings and crystal chandeliers gleaming in the subdued ambient light. The space was impeccable, worthy of a magazine page, with expensive furniture, precious works of art, and lustrous marble floors. The opulence of the room went unnoticed by the criminals. They were there for the treasures hidden behind glass cabinets and locked doors. "Let's start with the trunk," suggested Vince, scanning the room. "Then we'll take what we can get. Al, keep disabling the secondary alarms. Jenna, keep an eye on the surrounding area. Gary, start filling the bags." The team is set to work quickly, each assuming their role. But just as they were about to move deeper into the room, a subtle noise was heard, a faint tinkling that echoed through the mansion. It was almost imperceptible, a soft sound that seemed incongruous in the silence. The team froze. "What was that?" asked Gary, his hands tightening on the crowbar. Vince's brow furrowed. "Stay focused, stay calm," he replied. Al's fingers froze on his device. "This shouldn't be happening. The system's offline," he murmured. Karoline, seated in her high-tech control room, smiled slightly. The tinkling they'd heard was just a decoy, designed to test their reaction. As they froze in place, their minds wondering what could have gone wrong, Karoline watched them, amused by their confusion. The game was just beginning. The stillness of the mansion was briefly broken by an almost imperceptible tinkling sound. To the thieves, it was an anomaly, a sound foreign to their perfectly prepared operation. Each of them froze, heart pounding, caught between confusion and suspicion. Vince, whose instincts had been honed by years of experience, sensed immediately that something was wrong. He couldn't help thinking they'd triggered something unexpected. As his mind tried to understand the origin of the sound, a worry grew inside him. "Quiet," Vince breathed in an authoritative tone. His eyes scanned the great room. The marble floors sparkled in the subdued light, and the ornate paintings on the walls seemed to observe them with a strange gaze. Yet there was nothing to see. There was nothing to indicate that anything unusual had happened. Even so, Vince couldn't help feeling a tension in the air. "Let's keep moving," Vince decided, trying to push aside his doubts. "If something's wrong, we'll deal with it when we see it. Stay focused." He turned to Al. "Can you check the security systems again?" Al, momentarily distracted by the tinkling, resumed his work. His fingers danced over his device, examining the mansion's security network once again. "Nothing strange," he murmured. "The system's still offline, all clear." "Perfect," replied Vince more confidently. But doubt had already crept into his mind. He'd seen enough to know that things rarely went according to plan, even with meticulous preparation. A simple mistake could plunge the whole plan into chaos, and for the first time in a long time, he was beginning to wonder if this was going to be one of those nights. The team continued their silent progress through the mansion. They passed through the living room where glass display cases revealed priceless artifacts. Al's gaze rested for a moment on these exquisite objects, but he remained focused. He had a role to play, and nothing, not even the promise of riches, could distract him now. Gary, for his part, was becoming increasingly agitated. His large hands played nervously with the crowbar, his impatience palpable. "Come on, let's find that trunk and get out of here," he grumbled. But just as they were about to turn into the corridor leading to the stairs, another sound echoed through the halls. This time it wasn't a delicate tinkle, but a low hum, a sound that vibrated in the air, soft but undeniable. The hairs on the back of Vince's neck stood on end. "Did you hear that?" whispered Vince, his voice strained. His eyes scanned the room as if expecting something to pop up at any moment. Gary, who was in front, stopped dead in his tracks, an expression of disbelief on his face. "What's that noise?" he asked, a hint of panic creeping into his usually steady tone. Vince raised a hand. "Quiet," he ordered. His eyes scanned the room again. They'd rehearsed this moment countless times, so there was no question of failing now. The plan had been perfect from the start, and everything should have gone off without a hitch. Vince, the calm, authoritative leader, reached the back door first. He signaled to Al, who immediately retrieved a small device and began working on the security panel. The biometric lock, designed to prevent access by anyone without the necessary authorizations, posed no problem for Al. His fingers hovering over the buttons, he approached it like any other technical conundrum he'd solved before. "You got it?" whispered Vince, glancing over his shoulder. Yes, no problem," murmured Al, entirely focused on the panel. The soft glow of his device illuminated his face, the rapid movements of his hands testifying to his skill. His confidence grew with every passing second. Gary, standing nearby, moved restlessly. He was adjusting the strap of his bag, ready to fill it with whatever treasures they might find. While the others concentrated on the details, Gary's role was simple: provide muscle, carry the heavy stuff, and protect the crew. But as Al worked on the safety panel, Gary's patience began to wear thin. "Hurry up," Gary growls, his voice nothing more than a dull roar. "I'm not going to get caught hanging around here." Al looked at him briefly but said nothing. He couldn't afford to lose concentration. Finally, the lock disengaged with a soft beep and the door opened. "Let's go," Vince said firmly. The team slipped inside the mansion, their movements synchronized, their plans still intact. No sooner had they crossed the threshold than a cold draft greeted them. The great hallway stretched out before them, its dark woodwork and luxurious works of art bathed in dim light. The mansion was undeniably opulent, but none of them paid any attention to it. For them, it was just another target, another job to be done. Jenna took the lead, moving with the fluid grace of a shadow. Her sharp eyes scanned every corner, every ray of light. She was the team's best environmental analyst, and her instincts rarely deceived her. "Stay quiet," Jenna whispered in a firm voice. "There are motion detectors here. Stay out of their way and you'll be fine." Vince nodded, trusting her implicitly. He knew the importance of subtlety in this kind of mission, and Jenna had a definite talent for slipping into the tightest places. Behind her, Al followed close behind, camera in hand, keeping an eye on the mansion's complex security network. Gary led the way, eager to get at the loot. The plan was clear: get to the safe, collect the valuables, and leave undetected. But something wasn't quite right. As they moved forward, a faint hum began to fill the air. At first, it was subtle, like the gentle vibration of a distant machine. But the further they advanced, the more perceptible it became. "Do you hear that?" asked Vince in a low voice, glancing around. Al frowned, interrupting his work to listen. "Yes," he murmured, "but it's nothing on the system. The security's disconnected, the cameras are down. This shouldn't be happening." Gary scoffs. "Let's get the merchandise and get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." Vince doesn't react immediately. His instincts, honed by years of successful work, were screaming at him. Something was wrong. Unbeknownst to them, Karoline was observing the scene from her hidden control room. Her fingers hovered over the controls, a knowing smile on her face. The buzzing wasn't a problem, it was intentional. She had planned every second of this operation, and the thieves were falling into the trap she had carefully set. Vince motioned for the team to keep moving, but his instincts told him otherwise. As they crossed the large living room and approached the stairs leading to the second floor, the buzzing grew louder. Jenna, still in the lead, glanced back. "Something's not right," she murmured. "It's like this place is alive." Vince wanted to reject her words, but he felt it too. This wasn't another mansion to rob. This place, this job, it was different. And if they weren't careful, they might not get away with it. Al's fingers ran over his device, trying to locate the source of the buzzing sound that had transformed from a background anomaly into an ominous presence. The mansion's security system, once carefully analyzed, bypassed, and disabled, now seemed to defy logic. Vince stood nearby, tension rising, his hand instinctively brushing the butt of his gun. "What's going on?" asked Vince in a whisper, his voice hard with frustration. "Why is the system still fighting us?" Al didn't look up. Al doesn't look up. I've never seen anything like it. Cameras flashing, alarms changing frequency. It's as if someone is actively working against us. Whoever's in control won't let us take a single step without knowing it. Vince's jaw clenched. He'd prepared for obstacles, but not this level of resistance. This wasn't just a high-end security system. This was personal, deliberate. It was as if the mansion itself reacted to their every move, like an adversary calculating its next move. They reached a solid oak door, the wood heavy and intricately carved. Vince hesitated briefly, then pushed it open. Inside, they discovered a vast private study. Shelves filled with leather-bound books covered the walls, and deep mahogany furniture gave the room an air of wealth and authority. The centerpiece, however, wasn't the decor. It was a sleek, shiny monitor on a polished desk. That wasn't there before," stammered Al, whose usually confident tone was now tinged with trepidation. The screen came to life. A single word appeared in bold red letters: "Welcome." Vince reached for his gun, instinct alert, but held back. Something told him that brute force wouldn't solve the game they were caught up in. "Keep your cool," he murmured, his voice firm despite the tension in his chest. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Before either of them could make another move, the monitor flashed again. This time it displayed live images of the entire mansion. Every security camera came into focus, showing the various rooms they had just passed through, rooms they'd thought were safe behind them. As Vince and Al watched in silence, the images began to focus on their exact positions. The cameras followed their movements with eerie precision, as if the house were alive, watching their every step. "They're watching us," said Al, his voice barely audible. "And they've been watching us all along." Vince nods grimly. "Yeah, no kidding. Whoever's doing this isn't just watching us, they're playing us." Meanwhile, on the floor below, Jenna and Gary had reached their destination, the vault. The heavy metal door, which should have been securely locked, remained ajar, as if beckoning them to enter. Gary's impatience, previously simmering just below the surface, was now boiling. "This is bullshit," he growled. "Vince's plan is crap. Let's get the loot and get out of here before—" "Wait," Jenna interrupted, her tone sharper than before. "There's something wrong here. This door was sealed when we came in. Now it's wide open." Someone knew we were coming." Gary, normally unwavering, hesitated. He gripped the crowbar tighter, his confidence giving way to an uneasy distrust. The air around them seemed heavier, the silence oppressive. The treasure inside, gold bars, precious stones, piles of silver, was supposed to be their golden ticket. But now, none of it seemed safe. Nothing seemed to belong to them. "Feel that?" muttered Gary, his eyes scanning the room. "It's like someone's watching us, right now." Jenna nodded. "I feel it too. It's like this whole place is alive." On the second floor, Vince and Al froze in front of the screen. The cameras were no longer rolling randomly. Every one of them had locked onto the team. Vince's throat tightened as he noticed the text on the screen change again. The words forming a clear, undeniable message. "I see you." For the first time, Vince felt an ounce of fear. He prided himself on being in control, on always having a backup plan. But this was different. They weren't in charge. They weren't facing a state-of-the-art security system. They were pawns in someone else's game. "Who the hell is running this?" growled Vince, his voice low but furious. Al didn't answer. He stared at the screen, his fingers frozen on the controls. All his attempts to regain control had failed. The mansion wasn't just fortified, it was defending itself. Whatever script was running, whatever intelligence was behind the system, it was always one step ahead. "We've got to get out of here," Al said, finally breaking the silence. His voice cracked slightly, the first hint of fear appearing. "We can't leave empty-handed," Vince replied, even as the conviction faded from his voice. They'd gone too far, taken too many risks, but the reality was undeniable. They had underestimated their opponent, whoever he was. The tension was almost unbearable as the four criminals finally realized the magnitude of their situation. The treasure that had lured them here, the gold, the jewels, the promise of a huge windfall, no longer mattered. Each of them froze, consumed by the realization that they weren't simply up against a high-tech security system. They were trapped in a maze created by someone else, a game they couldn't win. Vince's mind raced, but no solution presented itself. He'd led his team on countless high-stakes operations, always confident in their ability to adapt. But this was something he'd never encountered before. Control had been taken from them. The mansion was no longer a simple building. It had become an entity that seemed alive, reacting to their every move. Every step they had taken had been anticipated. Every action they had planned had backfired. "Al," said Vince, his voice low, almost a growl, "you've got to find a way out of this. There has to be something, anything we can use." Al looked up from his device, his face pale, his fingers trembling. "I've tried everything," he stammered. "The system is more locked down than anything I've ever seen. Whoever's behind this, they're circling us." Jenna's calm, methodical demeanor had crumbled. She clutched at her arms, her eyes roaming the dark room. "We should have left as soon as we knew something was wrong," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "I knew it was too easy. I just didn't want to see it." Gary, usually the loudest and most brazen of the group, remained silent. His massive hands contracted into fists along his body. For once, he had nothing to say. The confidence that had always fueled his strength was gone, leaving him feeling small and powerless. He stared at the ground, the weight of their failure hanging over him like a leaden screed. Vince clenched his jaw, fighting the irresistible urge to lash out at something, anything. He'd been the boss, the one making the decisions, and now he could see the trail of mistakes, his mistakes, that had led them here. The signs had been there all along, but he'd ignored them, blamed them on paranoia or bad luck. He'd put too much faith in his plan and his skills, and now they were all paying the price. "Karoline," he muttered under his breath. The name was like poison in his mouth. She'd outdone them every time. It wasn't just because she had a better security system or more resources. She'd played them from the start, anticipating their every move, turning their confidence into their undoing. This wasn't a simple heist gone wrong. This was a calculated and deliberate trap set by someone who had always been 3 steps ahead. As the faint emergency lights came back on, a sense of finality settled over the group. Vince knows they're out of options. No plan B, no tricks, no brute force could get them out of this situation. They were at the mercy of their invisible adversary, and the silence that followed was deafening. All that remained was the weight of their failure. The treasure they had come for no longer had any meaning. It wasn't just the money they'd lost, it was their freedom, their confidence in their own abilities. They had entered this mansion hoping to emerge rich and untouchable. Instead, they had fallen directly into the hands of someone far more intelligent and ruthless. And now, with no escape in sight, all they could do was wait for what came next. They were trapped. Every effort to escape led them deeper into Karoline's meticulously planned labyrinth. Jenna stood, arms crossed, her keen eyes calculating, despite a shadow of doubt in her expression. "We've made too many mistakes," she said in a low voice. "And now we're paying the price. We should have trusted our instincts. We should have realized something was wrong from the start." Gary, still angry, brought down a massive fist on the nearest table. A vase shattered on impact, fragments scattering across the floor. "It's too late to dwell on that now," he growled. "The real question is, what's the next step? How the hell do we get out of here? We can't just sit here and wait for her to come and finish us off. For a long moment, Vince said nothing, his eyes fixed on the ground while his mind raced, reviewing the dwindling options. Deep down, he knew there was no easy way out. They had underestimated Karoline, not only her resources, but also the depth of her intelligence. What had seemed like a simple holdup had turned into a complex and inescapable trap. Vince's chest tightened under the weight of his own arrogance. "Maybe," said Vince finally in a calm voice, every word heavy. "Maybe we won't make it. Maybe we've already lost." The truth of those words hangs over them like a death sentence. Vince, the steadfast leader, the mastermind who had always seen a way out, now seemed resigned. Worse still, they all knew he was right. Jenna's coldness softened, but she didn't argue. Her silence spoke volumes. The mansion was no longer a place of opportunity, it was a tomb, and they were its prisoners. Gary's frustration was at its peak. He pounded the table again, his broad shoulders heaving. "No," he growled, gritting his teeth. "I'm not giving up. I don't care how much she planned this. We haven't come this far to throw in the towel." Vince looked up to meet Gary's defiant gaze. "Okay," said Vince, his voice firm but empty of hope. "But understand this, we no longer control anything. And whatever happens next, we brought it on ourselves." A heavy silence filled the room. The realization was inescapable. They'd played their last card, and it wasn't enough. The job had failed, and Karoline now held all the power. The mansion that had seemed an irresistible prize was a weapon turned against them. But even as the reality of defeat set in, there was a glimmer of rebellion. One last desperate urge to fight, to claw their way out of the grave they dug for themselves. It wasn't hope, but a refusal to accept their fate without a fight. Karoline was observing the situation from her command center, her face calm, her fingers poised on the controls. She had guided them to this point, step by step, anticipating every move. Now, the last move was hers, and the game was over. The mansion, her sanctuary, had become their undoing. The silence that followed his last words, "Game over," was crushing. The great estate, once full of opulence and possibility, now resembled a tomb. Vince remained motionless, staring at the black screens in front of him. His thoughts, usually so sharp and strategic, were clouded by the bitter taste of failure. They'd come so close, but the goal wasn't enough. Karoline had been waiting for them all along, and they'd fallen into every trap she'd set for them. Behind Vince, Al continued to manipulate his device, even though he knew it was useless. All exits were locked, all signals blocked. The mansion's systems were no longer simple security measures. They were the walls of a cage. Al's voice pierced the suffocating silence. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he murmured, his hand shaking. "We had it all planned. Leavitt was supposed to be gone. The house was supposed to be empty. We knew the plan, the systems, everything. How could it have gone so wrong?" Vince shakes his head slowly. "Because we got too greedy, Al. We thought we were smarter than we were. Smarter than her." He gestured to the room around them. "But we underestimated her, and now we're paying the price." Gary, pacing back and forth, finally snapped. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," he cried. "There's got to be a way out of this. I didn't come this far to let her win." "You should have listened to your instincts," Jenna said softly. "None of it felt right from the start. But we kept going, thinking we couldn't lose. And now," she paused, her voice heavy with regret, "now it's over." Gary's frustration reached its peak. "No," he said through clenched teeth, "we're not done yet. Either we find a way out or we die trying. I won't let myself be that way." Vince turned to him, his expression indecipherable. "There's no way out, Gary. Not this way. Karoline locked us in. If we leave, it'll be because she'll let us go." Gary's eyes flared with anger. "You're giving up? You've always been the one holding us together. And now you're… what? You accept this?" For a moment, Vince held his gaze. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, his voice calm and resigned. "Sometimes you're not in control of the game. Sometimes you're just a pawn." The words cut deep, silencing any further protest. They could all feel it, the oppressive truth of their situation. Karoline had anticipated their every move. manipulated their every decision until there was no way out. Every door they had opened had brought them closer to this moment. Every misstep had been planned. The faint echo of footsteps broke the silence. All four turned towards the noise, tension spreading through the room. The footsteps intensified, each amplifying the fear in the air. A shadow appeared in the doorway. It wasn't Karoline. A group of uniformed officers entered the room, their expressions stern and their stance inflexible. The team froze, their defeat now complete. Behind the officers, Karoline emerged, calm and composed, though a keen satisfaction shone in her eyes. "You made the mistake of underestimating me," she said, her voice clear and controlled. "You thought you could take from me without consequence. But you didn't account for the fact that I know my home and your plan better than you ever could." The officers moved in, handcuffing each member of the crew, their movements quick and professional. Vince, Jenna, Gary, and Al had no fight left. The humiliation was complete. As they were led out of the mansion, their dreams of a big score replaced with the cold reality of their own arrogance, Karoline's voice echoed in their minds. "This is my house," she had said, "and tonight it was you who were the intruders." The police cars pulled away from the mansion, the grand estate fading into the distance. The four sat in silence, the gravity of their failure weighing heavily on their shoulders. No amount of regret would change the outcome. They had played the game, and they had lost.